everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. Something very cool happened to me during this offseason. Now, you guys all know that I'm a diehard Miami Hurricanes fan, but I've been really vocal on how I believe Oklahoma has been incredibly disrespected during this offseason. Outside me and Josh McCray and JD Piquel, really nobody else seems to be high on Oklahoma. And since I've been so vocal in my support about how good I believe the Sooners are going to be this year, Oklahoma fans have somewhat adopted me into their fan base. Even though I'm not really an Oklahoma fan, they pretty much consider me one of them. So if I had a second favorite team behind Miami, it would be Oklahoma. Now, how this happened is that I've inserted myself into fighting a war for Oklahoma against them being irrelevant in the SEC. And really often, I come across comments that say Oklahoma is about to become the next Nebraska of college football. And if you don't know what it means to be the next Nebraska, essentially what they're trying to say is that Oklahoma moving from the Big 12 to the SEC is going to play out like how the move Nebraska made from the Big 12 to the Big 10 played out. And before Nebraska left the Big 12 for the Big 10, they were a consistent 8-win team or better the majority of years. And during the 90s, they were an absolute powerhouse. So when they got to the Big 10 after Bo Pelini retired, they fell off because they weren't able to recruit at a high enough level to win consistently in the Big 10, going up against more elite competition compared to what they faced in the Big 12. They whiffed on a bunch of head coaching hires that led them to going 8 years without having a winning record, which recently got snapped last year by Matt Rule. And with Nebraska struggling in the Big 10, Oklahoma gets the same comparisons, or at least a foreshadowing of what could be in store for them in the SEC in the foreseeable future, because the comparison between Oklahoma and Nebraska, I guess, Oklahoma has more so been built to dominate the Big 12 and in the SEC in the eyes of many. They don't really have the infrastructure people feel that's needed to sustain that level of success in the SEC that they had in the Big 12. But my pushback against this, and I've been arguing all off season with my brother College Football with Sam. Make sure you guys go ahead and check out his channel. But very often he hits me up or he sends off a tweet pretty much taking shots at Oklahoma, saying how they could possibly be what Nebraska is, which is his prediction. And the other day, he sent off a tweet that went absolutely bananas, saying how Nebraska was a better program right now than what Oklahoma is. And where I disagree with this, and where I push back on the notion that Oklahoma is going to be the new Nebraska, is how, first of all, Oklahoma has only had 6 seasons where they've gone without having double-digit wins in over a 25-year span. They just won 10 games 2 years ago, which seems like it happened 100 years ago, the way that nobody seems to talk about it. Everybody just makes it seem as if Oklahoma has been on this downturn for over the last 5 years, but we just act like that 10-win season and Brent Venables' second season never happened, but it did. So we have to bring that up. It also gets left out how Oklahoma has recruited pretty much at a top 10 level under Brent Venables. Now, last season, they fell into the 17 ranked recruiting class, but for the most part, Oklahoma has recruited good enough to have serviceable success in the SEC. Now, are they at a level where they could compete with the Georgias, the Alabamas of the world for the SEC championship? That remains to be seen. But Oklahoma, although they don't have the deep pockets that Texas, Miami, and Texas A&M have, they have enough NIL backing to where they can afford to pay for a decent amount of 5- and 4-star recruits. But what scares folks about the future of Oklahoma in this conference is Jim Nagy, their new general manager's approach to recruiting. He's not going to view 5- and 4-stars differently from 3- and 2-star players. If he sees a 2- or 3-star player that he himself and his staff, they look at the film and they feel like they're better than a 5-star, they will go after them instead of prioritizing overspending for 5- and 4-star recruits. And this approach has a lot of people scared, myself included, because normally the teams that win in the SEC consistently have a high blue chip ratio and a high number of blue chip talent on their team. But there are teams in the SEC, a lot of teams, believe it or not, that take this similar approach that Jim Nagy is looking to take, like Florida. They don't overly prioritize spending a lot on 5- and 4-star guys. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't do that, but they also have no problem taking a 3-star recruit. They won't overspend for certain positions. And that's the similar approach that I'm guessing Oklahoma is planning on taking. Missouri takes the same approach as well, along with South Carolina. And when you are so limited in NIL compared to your biggest rival, you have to be more efficient with how you spend that money, with how you spread that money out. Because if you use 80% of your NIL money on 5- and 4-star guys, you might only be able to fill a recruiting class that's probably only about 10 or 11 commits. But you can have a bigger recruiting class if you spread that money out. And let's say you spend like 2, 3, 4 million on about 6, 7 4-star guys, and you get a bunch of high-level 3-star recruits. If your player development is good, like how Oklahoma does a pretty good job at developing talent, at least they have done over the last couple of years, you should still be able to be a consistent 7-win team or better, with the occasional 10-win season being the ceiling, like what it is for Oklahoma this year if you hit on a few portal additions. Unlike Nebraska, however, Nebraska can't recruit at the level that Oklahoma can. It's been a very long time since Nebraska has had a top 10 class. So the ceiling in terms of team construction is a lot lower for Nebraska than what it is for Oklahoma. You will never see Nebraska ever under Matt Rule walk into a season being top 12 or higher and blue chip ratio. That's the amount of 5- and 4-star guys that teams have on their roster. Oklahoma has the capability of continuing to do that. They rank really high in blue chip ratio entering this season. And for Oklahoma to truly become the next Nebraska, like Nebraska, it will require them to whiff on a bunch of head coaching hires, because it's not as if Nebraska became miserable overnight. They always say misery loves company, and I guess that's why people want to put Oklahoma and Nebraska in the same vote. But Nebraska whiffed on Scott Frost. They whiffed on a bunch of other head coaches before him until they were able to finally get stability with Matt Rule. Well, ever since Lincoln Riley left Oklahoma, the only coach that they've had has been Brent Venables up to this point. And if Brent Venables doesn't work out, Oklahoma has more than enough money to go and get a capable head coach. They could get Fran Brown from Syracuse. They could go down the street to Dallas and get Rhett Lashley from SMU, the resources and the ceiling of Oklahoma's program is a lot higher than Nebraska's. Even Oklahoma at their worst last season is the equivalent to an okay season for Nebraska. Nebraska doesn't have the resources, nor the infrastructure, nor the recruiting potential to be what Oklahoma is. Oklahoma has always been good enough to compete in the SEC. They've always been a SEC level program to me, which is what makes the idea that Oklahoma is about to turn into Nebraska because they are in the SEC something that I just strongly disagree with. If you don't want the starting quarterback of your favorite team to play like Anthony Richardson, go ahead, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, check us out, JT Sports, on all podcasting platforms. Give us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. Let's get back to the video. You guys might have missed this if you're just getting back into college football. A month ago, the head coach of Illinois, Bret Bielema, came out on a podcast with Urban Meyer and essentially said that Georgia tampered and stole their leading rusher, running back Josh McCray. Now, Josh McCray was really productive at Illinois during his career there. This past season, he was the MVP of the Cheez-It Bowl. He scored 10 touchdowns during the entirety of the year, and he was averaging over 5 yards per carry. So Georgia, essentially, as soon as Josh McCray hopped in the transfer portal, he already knew that he was coming to Athens. Georgia was already ahead of it, which is what made Brent Bielema think that Georgia openly tampered with him, and they essentially stole him off Illinois' team. Now, Brent Bielema tried to recently come back and try to do damage control, but the damage was already done. You straight up accused Georgia of stealing your best player. So we're going to go with the narrative that Georgia did indeed steal Josh McCray from Illinois. And what does Georgia stealing Josh McCray from Illinois mean? Well, for one, they're going to improve what was their biggest weakness on offense last year, which was their inability to play complementary football because they couldn't have a consistent rushing attack. Georgia had their worst rushing attack under Kirby Smart during his Georgia tenure last season, where they ranked 122nd in all of FBS in rushing yards per game. And they also were 110th in the country in rush attempts per game. Normally, Georgia, on most occasions, is in the middle of the pack in rushing attempts and pass attempts. They normally do a really good job of having a good balance of run and pass, but last year they were just completely one-dimensional to the point when they had to rely on Carson Beck to win them games, and that was a recipe for disaster that somehow Kirby Smart was able to overcome and still win the SEC, which is a testament to how good of a coach Kirby Smart is. He's the best head coach in college football right now for that reason. But with getting Josh McCray now, you fix that inability to consistently run the ball now because you have one of the best running back duos, not just in the SEC, but in all of college football entering this season. Because as good as what Josh McCray was, let's not forget about what Nate Frazier did as a true freshman last season, despite being behind an offensive line that was down in terms of level of play than what we've grown accustomed to seeing the Georgia offensive line play at. He was a true freshman who still somehow averaged 5 yards per carry, 671 rushing yards, and 8 touchdowns last season. He was really good for Georgia just to be 1 year removed from high school. So now you got Nate Frazier and Josh McCray. You have one of the better running back duos in college football. And last season, it was thought that when Georgia got Trevor Etienne from Florida, that they would have a good 1-2 punch at the running back position. However, what went wrong with that plan is that Trevor Etienne, he struggled to stay healthy due to injuries. So now, with Josh McCray and Nate Frazier, you're going to be able to rotate both of these bats, keep both of them fresh, make sure that neither one gets injured because neither one will have a huge workload. They'll be able to split up the reps, split up the carries. And with the rushing attack being back to Georgia's standards, that's going to take a lot of the pressure off for Gunnar Stockton that Carson Beck had on his shoulders last year. If you want to know why Carson Beck's production dropped from 2023 to 2024, it was because he was asked to do a lot more. Carson Beck is a highly effective game manager. And that's the kind of quarterbacks that Kirby Smart is accustomed to winning with. This was the same guy who picked Jake Fromm over Justin Fields. This is the same coach that won back-to-back national championships with the mailman Sir Stetson Bennett, who, let me remind you, was a walk-on. So Kirby Smart doesn't need flashy quarterback play to win. He just needs somebody who doesn't lose games, who takes care of the football. And that's what Gunnar Stockton has the ability to be for Georgia this year, because unlike Carson Beck, he's not going to have as much on his plate because Georgia can now play complementary football. With Georgia now being able to run the football, they aren't going to be as reliant on the ball as what they were last year. Last year, Georgia was 23rd in the country in pass attempts per game. Normally, they are around the middle of the pack, anywhere between the low 50s, high 60s in that department. So with Georgia being able to run the football, you don't have to ask Gunnar Stockton to throw the ball 30-plus times to win you games. You can ask him to throw 24 or 25 times a game, which limits the amount of risk that you take with him turning the football over. And it's Georgia going back to their old style play that helped them be so dominant during their back-to-back national title run. They do have a better capability of being more efficient throwing the ball this year than what they did last year, because they did improve the wide receiving core with the additions that they got out of the transfer portal. But getting Josh McCray from Illinois fixes pretty much everything that was wrong with Georgia's offense. Now you don't have to rely on the passing attack as much, which takes a lot of the load off for your quarterback. Then you can run the football a lot more effectively, which is going to help you be more unpredictable on offense. And then third, which is something that nobody's talking about, it improves Georgia's defense because now they're not on the field for as many plays as what they were last year, because you're not going to have the same frequency of turnovers as what you did last year, because you're not going to put Gunnar Stockton in those kinds of situations to turn the football over that much. And two, you're going to be a lot better at controlling the clock, at winning the time of possession battle, which gives your defense more rest, which leads to those big guys up front not getting gas as fast as what they did last year. Because a huge issue that Georgia had is not that they were lacking in the talent when it came to their starters on the defensive line, but they didn't have the same kind of quality depth that they had in years past due to getting raided by the transfer portal of their depth on the defensive line. Georgia stealing Josh McCray from Illinois completely fixes a lot of the big issues that this team had last season, specifically on offense. How many times does South Carolina have to keep teaching everybody this lesson? How many times do the Beamer boys have to continue to prove this conference wrong year after year? Because last year, they went into the 2024 college football season with a projected win total of 5.5 wins. And they finished the season 9-4. A few years ago, back in 2022, the same thing happened. They were projected to not be that good, to finish in the bottom half of the conference, and they won 8 games. Well, this year, despite being proven wrong by South Carolina over the last 2-3 years, the same mistake is still being made with the prediction of how this team is going to fare in the SEC this year. Once again, South Carolina is being underestimated, and nobody has learned their lesson about underestimating the Beamer Boys in the past, because ESPN's FPI projects South Carolina to finish 9th place in this conference this year, which is absolutely outrageous to me. Because South Carolina, despite how they don't recruit at the level that LSU, Texas, Alabama, and Georgia do, they do a really good job in their player evaluation of high school recruits and guys in the transfer portal. They have a really good player development program. And what they have entering this season that nobody else has in the SEC, that gives them a huge advantage over everybody else in this conference, that gives them a good chance of making it to the playoffs this year, is that they can say that they have 2 of the 5 best players in all of college football right now. You have 2 players that play 2 positions that have the greatest impact on the outcome of games, that being quarterback Lenore Sellers and pass rusher Dylan Stewart. Last season, Lenore Sellers was the hottest quarterback in the second half of the 2024 season. He had over 18 touchdowns and over 5 turnovers. It's the most miraculous in-season improvement that I've ever seen a quarterback have. Because for the first half of last season, Lenore Sellers was looking more like Anthony Richardson than he was Cam Newton. But all of a sudden, after that Alabama game, something just clicked for him. Something just snapped. Maybe it's because he made a change from wearing the goggles to going with contact lenses. Can't really put my finger on what it was that sparked the random improvement from Lenore Sellers. But go back and watch that Clemson game. By himself, he won that game for South Carolina. When Lenore Sellers is on, South Carolina is one of the toughest teams to beat in college football, because he has a similar impact to what Cam Newton has. This dude is a bowling ball at quarterback. Literally, you get him in an open field one-on-one with a defender, he's going to win 80-90% of the time. He had the most broken tackles in a single game than anybody else last season. That was more than what Ashton Genty had against Oregon when Lenore Sellers broke 18 tackles against Clemson. That's the kind of X factor that Lenore Sellers is. When he's on and he's playing his best football, there's not a single team that South Carolina can't get right with. And let's not even forget about the freak that Dylan Stewart is. At 18, 19 years old, fresh out of high school, this dude was commanding triple and quadruple teams, and he was opening everything up for the rest of the talented defensive linemen that South Carolina had. This is Jadeveon Clowney reincarnated in Dylan Stewart. He's going to be a potential top 5 pick in the NFL draft 2 years from now, along with Lenore Sellers. Hell, if Lenore Sellers comes out next year, he will be in the conversation to be the first overall pick. Even if Arch Manning declares along with him, he could be the first quarterback taken off of the board because of the potential, because of the athleticism, because of the game-changing ability that he possessed. You have 2 players on South Carolina, and Dylan Stewart and Lenore Sellers, who by themselves have the ability to swing the outcome of games in South Carolina's favor. When you have 2 high-level players at 2 of the most impactful positions when it comes to wins, it's hard to overlook a team like South Carolina. South Carolina, you know why they always get slept on every season? Because people focus too much on judging this team by what they have on paper, and they don't give this squad enough benefit of a doubt because of their player development, because of how good they are at evaluating talent in the portal and guys out of high school. Because South Carolina is a team that oftentimes, when you are judging and trying to predict how good a team is going to fare during the season, a lot of things that they do right and that they do incredibly well, you can't judge and look at on paper. You overlook how Shane Beamer is the best big game coach in college football when he's an underdog. And last year, South Carolina, during the regular season, finished 9-3 when they could have finished 11-1. They got screwed by the referees and their home loss against LSU. They came really close to pulling off a win against Alabama. Shane Beamer, there's not a better coach in the big game, being an underdog that gets you ready to play against the best competition on your schedule than what Shane Beamer does. When you play South Carolina in October or November, you risk having a strong possibility of your playoff hopes ending to the hands of the Gamecocks. October is a real thing, people. It is. Let's not forget what happened in 2022 when South Carolina ended Tennessee's playoff hopes and Hendon Hooker's Heisman candidacy. And then the following week later, they absolutely obliterated Clemson. Once again, South Carolina has to teach the SEC another lesson about why you should never overlook the Beamer boys. This is the most freakish team in the SEC this year in terms of just having a bunch of super athletic players. I told you about Lenore Sellers and Dylan Stewart, but did I tell you about Nick Harbor? This monster at receiver who's like 6'5", 6'6", 240, 250 something pounds and has Olympic-like speed. This is the last team that anybody should be sleeping on. And if you didn't learn from underestimating South Carolina over the past 2-3 years, you're going to learn once again when South Carolina teaches you and the rest of the SEC why underestimating the Beamer boys is a huge mistake to make. Tennessee is going to regress this year. They went to the playoffs. They won 10 games last year. Why is it that they can't sustain that level of success this season? Why is it that Tennessee hasn't cemented themselves as an elite program that should be given the benefit of a doubt despite all that they lose during this offseason? The reason why I project Tennessee regresses this year is not because of them losing Nico Imariava. If anything, Joey Aguilar could prove to be a significant upgrade over Nico Imariava because this dude was the most overrated quarterback in college football. Up until that game against Vanderbilt, the dude only had 2-3 touchdowns in SEC play. Losing Nico isn't why I believe Tennessee is going to see slight regression this year. There are other concerns that far exceed the loss of Nico Imariava. They lose 3 of their top 3 wide receivers from last year. Deontay Thornton, Bro McCoy, Squirrel White, they're all gone. You're going to have 3 completely new receivers in this offense. Your offensive line loses 4 starters. Your secondary is incredibly thin. Your star cornerback, Jamal McCoy, suffered a significant injury at the start of this offseason. When will he return? That's to be decided. Your defensive line is still really good, but do you still have the same amount of depth at that position that you had last year that allowed you to rotate so many guys to win now entering this season? Despite the losses to guys like James Pierce, you still have a good amount of experience this year because you were able to rotate in so many fresh bodies. Do you still have the ability to do that? Because with the transfer portal and NIL now, very seldom do you see teams have the kind of depth as what Tennessee has on the O-line and D-line. The line of scrimmage is a huge question for the Vols this year, And it's one of the big reasons why I can see them regressing from a 10-win team to being a 8-win team this year. We don't know how good the receiving core is going to be. You can tell me that Chris Brazil has a breakout season, who you got out of the transfer portal last year from Tulane. I wouldn't push back on that. Mike Matthews was a really highly talented receiver coming out of high school, but just how good is he going to be? Is he going to be able to match or equal the production that you got out of both Deontay Thornton and Bro McCoy? That is to be decided. There are a lot of questions that Tennessee has entering this season that doesn't revolve around the departure of Nico Imaviava. And the biggest loss that Tennessee took was them losing Dylan Sampson. Dylan Sampson was the driving force behind Tennessee making that playoff push last year. And that's why I say losing Nico doesn't really matter. It doesn't, because Dylan Sampson was the MVP of Tennessee football last year. This dude carried Tennessee's offense on his back. And normally, when you think of Josh Heupel and you hear air raid offense, you equate that to a team that's slinging that rock all over the field 40, 50 times a game, when in all actuality, Tennessee was a run-first team due to how good Dylan Sampson was. Now, Tennessee fans, their counter argument for losing Dylan Sampson is that, well, we got two really good running backs that should break out this year, Deshaun Bishop and Peyton Lewis. I'm not telling you that I'm against those guys breaking out, but it's hard to replicate the kind of season that Dylan Sampson had last year. Dylan Sampson essentially had the greatest season for a Tennessee running back in the history of this program. He was SEC Offensive Player of the Year for a reason. It's hard to go from that at running back to all of a sudden two guys who could be both split together as good as what a Dylan Sampson was. He kind of had a generational kind of season for Tennessee. So there are a lot of concerns for Tennessee walking into this season that I have for why I believe this team is going to regress this year. You have to play Syracuse week 1. You are a 2-touchdown favorite at the moment walking into that game. You could very well lose it. You got to play Georgia, who's going to be reloaded. Despite having a down season, you still lost to the Dogs last year. You got to play Alabama on the road this season. You beat them at home. Alabama's going to have better quarterback play than what they had last season. You got to play Oklahoma, who's going to be a lot better this season than what they were last year. When you played Oklahoma last year, your defense carried you to a win in that game. Florida, they were really close to beating you last year. They gave you a scare in Neyland. So it's not that I believe that Tennessee is incapable of replicating the success that they had last year when they made it to the playoffs. They could very well make it back to the playoffs once again. But what I'm telling you is that there is fair reasons to expect regression out of Tennessee this year, because it is incredibly difficult to replace the amount that Tennessee has to replace when it comes to the line of scrimmage, offensive line, defensive line, losing 3 of your most productive receivers. My reason for Tennessee regressing has nothing to do with Nico Imaviava. It shouldn't really impact them at all. Joey Aguilar could very well be better than him. But there are a lot of deficiencies that Tennessee is going to have to address this season if they want to repeat once again as a playoff participant. Can we all stop pretending that LSU is overrated? Can we stop pretending that this team isn't talented enough to make it to the college football playoffs? This is one of the 5 best teams entering this upcoming college football season. I mean, they are loaded absolutely everywhere. If your argument against LSU is, well, they went really heavy in the transfer portal and teams that are dependent on the transfer portal heavily, normally don't have that much success. LSU is not a team that success has been built off what they do in the portal. On average, under Brian Kelly, they have recruited the sixth best class every single season under him. The transfer portal, what LSU did this offseason was them trying to capitalize what they already brought back based off how well they have recruited. And when you have a team like what LSU has this year, it makes sense to go all in like what they did on the portal, because if you can hit on a few high-level guys and you mix that with the high-level guys that you already bring back, like Garrett Nussmeier entering his second season as a starter, you have a healthy Harold Perkins along with linebacker Whit Weeks, who comes off a breakout season, and you combine that with guys like Nick Anderson and Barrion Brown, Patrick Payton, you end up having a team that mixed with the guys they recruited and mixed with the guys that they got out of the transfer portal ends up being so loaded that it makes it hard for them not to make it to the playoffs. A lot has to go wrong for LSU this year for them to at least not win 9 games. 9 wins gets LSU into the playoffs this year. The committee already wanted to put in a 9-win team last year, but the losses that those 9-win teams suffered were just so bad that they couldn't put them in. If Alabama never lost to Oklahoma and Ole Miss never lost to Kentucky or got upset by Florida, if they would have won those games, they would have been in the playoffs. If those losses would have came to ranked teams, they still would have gotten in because the committee favors strength of schedule. But the strength of schedule argument didn't benefit Alabama and Ole Miss due to the losses that they sustained against inferior opponents. LSU, with how difficult their schedule is, even if you do lose to Clemson in week 1, you still have a larger margin for error to get into the playoffs than what Alabama and Ole Miss had last season due to how difficult your schedule is. So even with 3 losses, if you get wins over Alabama or any other of the ranked teams that you play, as long as you don't lose to some of the worst teams on your schedule, 9 wins gets you into the playoffs this year. But I think that realistically, LSU should go 10-2. Garrett Nussmeier should follow the similar trend that we saw Jaden Daniels and Joe Burrow fall in line in when they balled out in their second seasons. They won the Heisman Trophy, and they got drafted high in the NFL draft. Yeah, he had a bunch of turnovers, but turnovers are something that can be improved. And with LSU hopefully being a lot better at running the football this season, you won't have as much on Garrett Nussmeier's plate this season compared to last year. You also have Garrett Nussmeier throwing to one of the best receiving corps in all of college football. How is your offensive line going to look? That's the biggest question about LSU this year. But if we flip over to defense, Blake Baker enters year 2, and this defense was drastically better in his first season than what it was the year before. Do you want to know why LSU, despite having a team with Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, and Brian Thomas Jr., didn't make it to the playoffs? How about when you have the worst defense in the history of your program? That's an easy way to miss the playoffs. When you got to drop 45, 50 points on everybody you play to win, of course you're not going to get into the playoffs. With Blake Baker being in his second season as LSU's defensive coordinator, this easily should be a playoff caliber defense. They should be top 50 or better with what they bring back with Harold Perkins and Wilt Weeks and what they return or what they got out of the transfer portal on the defensive line and in the secondary. This is the most talented team that LSU has had since they last won a national championship 6 years ago in 2019. you may not trust Brian Kelly, but Brian Kelly has been coaching for 21 years. He's been coaching for longer than a lot of us have been alive watching this sport. And he's won 70% of his games. He's won at Notre Dame. He's won at Cincinnati. He's proven that if you give him a team as talented as what LSU is this season, he can maximize it and he can get you to 10 wins and to the playoffs. Can you win a national championship with Brian Kelly? I don't know. I don't believe that you can, but can he get you close to attaining that goal? He definitely can get you in striking distance. If you are high on James Franklin, you should be high on Brian Kelly. Neither one of these dudes are fantastic coaches, but they both have great stacked teams entering this season that kind of makes it completely foolproof for them not to make it to the playoffs unless they just completely bomb. And Brian Kelly isn't a bad enough coach to flame out and get fired. At worst, LSU is a 9-3 team, and they sneak into the playoffs as the 12th or 11th seed. At best, this could be a team that completely runs the table, and they finish 12-0. They go into the SEC championship game undefeated, and depending on who they play, whether it be Texas, Alabama, or Georgia, they got a good chance of winning the conference. So for LSU this year, I don't see this team disappointing. We got to stop acting as if LSU doesn't have the firepower to win the SEC, to make it to the playoffs, and to possibly contend for the national championship. Do you know what college football fears the most? It's not a team. It's not a coach. It's one particular state that college football is downright terrified of, that being the Sunshine State, the lovely state of Florida, home to Miami, FSU, and the University of Florida. You see, for over the last decade or so, you've had several national championship teams that have benefited off of this state and recruiting. Most recently, Ohio State getting Jeremiah Smith from the backyard of Miami. And he had the greatest freshman season ever for a first-year wide receiver. If Miami and Florida can end up living up to the potential that they have this year, they could completely resurrect the entirety of this state to the point when now you have two of the big three schools in this state now showing recruits that they have the ability to win at the highest level, to compete not just for a spot in the playoffs, but for a national championship. Now you get recruits sold again. Now recruits have a reason to stay home. Now recruits have a reason to be confident that staying home, playing for Florida, playing for Miami, not just gives them an opportunity to play in the biggest games and win those matchups, but to also compete for championships as well and get developed to be a first-round pick in the NFL draft. Miami has several potential first-round picks on their team this year. Same thing with Florida. Look out for Caleb Banks. He's going to be an absolute monster. Same thing with Tyreek Sapp. Florida and Miami this year, both of these teams' ceiling is playoffs. And possibly you could see both of these two teams in their conference championship games with the amount of talent that both of these two schools have on their roster. Now, we don't really know what to make of Florida State. Florida State could go a variety of different ways. They could be slightly better than what they were last year, and instead of only winning 2 games, they could win 5 games, but they also could completely make a 180 and win 8, maybe 9 games at best, and possibly find themselves in contention for the ACC championship again. You really don't know about FSU. They have one of the lowest floors, but one of the highest ceilings out of any team entering this upcoming college football season. But it's not as if Florida State is a completely dead program. So let's just say hypothetically, Florida State is an 8-win team. That's respectable. That lets recruits know that, okay, they were able to rebound, and if we commit to FSU, we can be the class that can finish off what FSU's previous squad 2 years ago with Jordan Travis, Jared Verse, Johnny Wilson, and Keon Coleman were unable to do. Actually get this program to the playoffs and bring a national title back to Doak Campbell, back to Tallahassee. So the state of college football in Florida has never looked as good as what it currently does this year. Both Miami and Florida have the capability of being top 10 teams or better. Miami versus Florida is going to have a different feel to it this season than what it has in the last 10, 15 years, because the ceiling for both of these two teams is higher than it's ever been. We haven't had a matchup against Miami and Florida with this amount of stakes as what we currently have this year. That game against Florida and Miami could be the difference between a team making and missing the college football playoffs. You have DJ Lagway, who is gassed up as the Messiah of Florida football. I'm just speaking in the football terms. He's viewed as the second coming of Tim Tebow. Miami with Carson Beck. If he can resurrect his career and you get 2023 Carson Beck, you have arguably the best quarterback in college football and another first-round pick at quarterback. If Miami and Florida are both able to play up to the level of expectations that everybody has for them, college football can be in trouble, because now teams like Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, they won't just be able to walk into Florida and have an all-you-can-eat buffet with all of the top talents in this state, because now Miami and Florida being good can lock back down the state of Florida to when you start to see Florida and Miami start to retain more of this blue chip in-state talent. You got more guys like Jeremiah Smith that feel they can get developed staying home and don't feel the need to have to go across the country to get developed. And if Florida State can win 7, 8 games, then they show enough promise to when recruits can say, okay, like, they're not completely dead in the water. I can come in and give this program a shot if I get developed properly to be up there along with Miami and Florida this year. College football has a right to fear the state of Florida, because when this state is good, it cuts off an easy pipeline to elite talent that national championship teams have had access to for well over a decade. Now you have to go elsewhere and get that talent. Now, you still are going to have a few guys that slip through the cracks just because, but with Florida and Miami possibly being good this year, it changes everything for college football. It completely shifts the power dynamic in this sport, because Miami and Florida, with the amount of talent that's in this state alone, they don't really have to recruit nationally. Their recruiting wars are going to mean much more when you're fighting for some of the best players in this state with universities that are like 4-5 hours away from each other. Then recruiting matters, because with the new NIL restrictions that are being in place, you're not going to be able to just outspend everybody. It's going to come down to a recruit valuing one or the other program and their ability to develop them more. The state of Florida should have college football on edge right now, because I believe that both Miami and Florida would be really good this year. And possibly we could see them in the playoffs if everything goes right. And if that happens, the rest of college football is in trouble.